fundamentally, when we talk about B2B, what we're really thinking about is the piece that makes this complex. Multiple people have to make a decision. It's made over an extended period of time. There's authorities and steps. There's influencers, there's economic buyers, there's users. And it's the complexity of the buying and the using and adopting process that makes B2B different.
Hi, I'm Nishant Garg with WhatMarketWants. My guest for today is a B2B marketing expert. She's the founder of the Marketing Advisory Network. She's the author of the book Unleash Possible, and she's here to discuss about business-to-business marketing. Let's welcome Samantha Stone. Hi.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
So Samantha, how's your journey been in the marketing world?
Oh, well, that's a very big question. I don't know if you want a full answer to that, but what I can tell you is that marketing has changed many times over my career. And it's been an incredible journey and opportunity to watch that. But as much as things have changed, there are some things that are foundational that remain the same. Good practices that allow us to build strategies that allow us to be adaptable. And those are things that we rely on, particularly in times like these. Excuse me, I apologize. I have a sore throat, so I'll do my best not to clear it while you're taping.
That's all right. So tell me, how has B2B marketing evolved in the last decade?
Well, it's a really good question. I will tell you that almost everything has changed. So the way we communicate has changed, the channels that we use, right? It used to be that channels like Facebook and even LinkedIn were not strong B2B marketing channels, and that's completely changed today. How we talk has changed. When I went back, I was actually cleaning an old desk that I had in my office, and I pulled out some files that were from about 15 years ago, and I was looking at the writing. They were like sample cover letters and templates for salespeople in email, and it was so much more formal and so much more writing style conservative in how we communicated with companies. And today we are blessed to be able to communicate conversationally with buyers. And it's a huge shift in how we think about the B2B buying process. And then this last year has shifted things even more dramatically with the pandemic, and that a lot of sales processes that were still largely in-person dependent, not meaning that every step was in person, but that there was still a pretty heavy get the buying committee together in a room, show them a demonstration of something, they get around a table and they rate and evaluate people. That's all being done differently today and mostly remotely. And so there's this really big, meaningful shifts in B2B marketing that we've seen over the last few years that has only been accelerated with the pandemic.
So tell me, what is the fundamental difference between business to business marketing versus business to consumer marketing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will tell you that I think the difference between B2B and B2C is a little misleading. Really, there's a difference between complex selling processes that have multiple decision makers and more single person, shorter sales cycle, easier decision process selling. So we tend to call the more complex thing B2B and the simpler thing B2C, but there are complex consumer buys and there are simple buys that happen on the B2B side. But fundamentally, when we talk about B2B, what we're really thinking about is the piece that makes this complex. Multiple people have to make a decision. It's made over an extended period of time. There's authorities and steps. There's influencers, there's economic buyers, there's users. And it's the complexity of the buying and the using and adopting process that makes B2B different, because it has this organizational layer that we don't see. If I want to go out and buy groceries, right, for my family, I might be influenced by my adult children and what they being home for the holidays and what they're going to eat, right? That might change my groceries for the week. But fundamentally, I still decide what I'm going to go buy. I still, and the person who also pays. I may like to browse the aisles, or I may use like a food shopping service like an Instacart. But the decisioning process is really mine. And that's the fundamental difference between working with an organization and working with an individual person.
I really like your answer. It's all about the simplicity or complexity of the offering. So tell me, does your approach to marketing change for a B2B product versus a B2B service?
That's a good question. I mean, I think things are different no matter what product you're selling or service you're selling. So yes, they're unique to the organization. One of the things that I do a lot of is I'll help organizations do like persona work, trying to understand their buyers. And I'll often have clients say to me, hey, you've done thousands of IT manager interviews. What's my IT manager persona? And I always tell them, I can't tell you that because there are pieces of it that are common across different organizations and different things that I might be selling, but their perceptions of your category of product or service are very different. When I'm selling a service versus a product, I still need to show the pain that it solves. I still need to demonstrate its value. I still need to help people calculate how much it's worth. And I still believe that even in a product sale, the people that go with the product are an instrumental part of the process because there's ongoing support and services that are likely wrapped around your product. If I'm a services organization, I might not have to demonstrate what my thing does, but I have to prove to somebody that I can serve them. And they both have intricacies that are different, but are really important to be able to express, particularly to a new client versus someone that I might be selling to on a repeated basis.
So according to you, what are the key components of a B2B marketing strategy and what is your process of developing one?
Number one, it has to always start with a buyer investigation to really understand what buyers' needs are today, what their buying processes are today, what they care about, the context of the market that you're selling into. So that sort of external piece is number one. Then number two is the assessment of what do we do well? Where do we actually make money? What of our products or services are easiest for us to support? Or where do we see recurring revenue coming from? We may have multiple things that we could sell. So it has to do with sort of the assessment. Where are our strengths? What are we known for today? So we do the external assessment, we do the internal assessment, and we see where those overlaps are. Now I can start looking at tactics and I can start looking at now how am I going to communicate those things to the market. But the strategy has to start with those really taking the step back and doing my research and being objective as I possibly can about learning about my market and myself and not relying on old assumptions and things that we might have done a long time ago.
So in your opinion, which brands are doing a good job at B2B marketing?
There's a lot of brands, I think, that do a good job in the B2B marketing space. And I think it depends on what it is. I look at a company, for example, like IBM Watson, right? So I won't talk about IBM fully, but if I look at Watson as a brand, they've done an incredible job of taking a very complex thing that a small portion of the world could actually use, right? There's a small developer community of people who could actually use it when we think about relative to human population, right? It's very, very narrow. But to fund the development of Watson applications and to find uses for the technology, business people needed to get involved. So they had to architect strategies for helping people who are non-technologists understand why Watson was an important foundation for what they're doing. So I think they're a good example of a company who's done that. In the marketing world, I think there are lots of examples of companies who have done a pretty good job of this. I look at a company like Drift, for example, right? Drift was effectively a chatbot, right? I mean, I know that's not how they describe it, but that, at the early days, that's effectively what it was. They were entering a pretty commodity technology market, and they completely changed the conversation to something different. And they had their marketing users using the product in a way that a lot of people hadn't used this technology before. And they changed the thought process about how we use that. So those are both really different organizations. One was a small, scrappy company trying to, make their way in the world. And the other was this very long established company that maybe had periods of getting a little stale, and they were trying to reestablish this huge foothold in this forward-looking thing. And they both did that by understanding the psychology about the people that they wanted to sell, understanding the buying process of who was involved, and being creative about how they communicated the message to those audiences.
Yes, Drift has done a good job. I like their book, Conversational Marketing.
Yes, the conversational marketing, exactly.
Wow. So tell me, do you have a secret recipe to create a successful B2B marketing campaign?
Oh gosh, if I did, I'd be really, really living on a beach somewhere, owning an island. I think that there isn't a secret campaign, but there are some things that I think contribute to having successful campaigns. So one of the things that contributes to that is really how you brainstorm and how you ideate around a campaign. So let's assume we really understand our buyers well, and we've done a good job of documenting that and understanding it and learning about that. Now we've got to go out and sort of tell the world about this message. And a lot of times what we do is we get into a room with a couple other people. Nowadays that might be on a Zoom with a couple other people. And we brainstorm and we stop at the first good idea. And the stopping at the first good idea has its own challenges, but we never get to the amazing idea when we do that. The second thing we do is we look too much for surety, right? We get too dependent on, well, I know if I take this piece of content and I put it through content syndication with one of these 3 publications, I'm going to get X the other side. And so we sort of just like focus on that. The other thing that we do with campaigns that is really actually very easy to break, but almost no one does, is we get too centered on our internal review process. So in a B2B marketing role, almost all of us have an extensive review and approval process before a campaign makes it to the world. And when we do that, we start to take some of the edge off of what we're creating to appeal to internal people within our organization. Rarely are those internal people who our audience is. One of the simplest things that can make your campaign be effective is to test it with your actual intended audience before you roll it out to market. And that might be a very simple qualitative test where I'm calling 5 people who are in our community and I'm saying, what do you think of this? And I don't ask a whole lot of leading questions. I get reactions. And I can tell you from doing those exercises, I learned a tremendous amount every time I do that, even with very small sample sizes. That takes an okay effort and turns it into a really good, solid one that has a much better chance of succeeding. And then the very last thing that I will tell you, that is a very common mistake that is something we can overcome consistently, is how we measure campaigns. We are often far too worried about vanity metrics. How many people saw this? How many impressions did we get? How many clicks did we get? When we really need to look at campaigns and how much they're impacting the buyers. How are they changing the way our community thinks? How are they affecting our business in the long term? And we need to do a much better job of those things, listening to our buyers, testing the ideas, and measuring the right things, and brainstorming in new ways that releases some of the constraints we put on ourselves. When we do that, we get much better work that comes out the other side.
On the same note, what are the most common mistakes you see companies make with their B2B marketing campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, the number one mistake is measuring the wrong thing, is absolutely the other thing. The second big mistake we have is we do what we think is buyer and competitive research. And what we do is we interview our sales team. And we take everything the sales team says, and that becomes the foundation. Now, first of all, every good research project should start by taking whatever internal knowledge we have and capturing it. So interviewing and talking to salespeople is a good and important part of the process. The problem is we take it at face value and we stop there. The reason that's a problem is because salespeople aren't lying to us. They're intelligent. They do understand their business, but they only interact with buyers in the context of being a salesperson. And buyers don't tell them everything. And they don't see a whole bunch of the process that a buyer might be going through before or after they have a conversation with the person. And so that is the second biggest mistake we make, is being too dependent on internal knowledge and not making sure that we're doing very regular and consistent and predictable external validation for the things we believe to be true.
If you could break it down, what does the B2B buyer's journey look like?
Well, every B2B buyer's journey has some shared characteristics. Something triggers a purchase, right? Then when the trigger is purchased, they think about what are my needs. So they start to document their requirements. Then they think about how might I solve this problem? Am I going to build something myself? Do we already have maybe something in-house that I could adapt and use for this purpose? Maybe I'm going to go out and look at vendors. Once I decide I'm going to go look at vendors, now I'm going to do vendor comparisons. Now I'm going to negotiate. Then I'm going to adopt and use the product and hopefully become an advocate. Those steps are the buyer's journey. However, every single process varies dramatically based on the product that you sell and or service that you sell and the types of companies you serve. So while those steps are pretty consistent, the details underneath them vary tremendously.
So how do you find out the buyer's persona? What is your process of defining it?
Yeah, so I'm a really big believer that the thing that makes organizations do this very well is qualitative research. So you can look at your data. What are the things that your system tells us? When do people interact with you? And you should do that. You should look at reports. You should talk to organizations that do things like review sites, have some great insight. You should do surveys. You should do all of those things. But the thing that separates the top performing companies from the modest or poor performing companies are the ones who also add a qualitative element to their buyer's journey mapping. The reason that is so important is because it doesn't just tell us the steps someone takes. I can see on my website what people click on. I don't know why. The qualitative interview process helps me understand why. And when I understand why, now I can do things. Now, ideally, maybe I'm going on site to people and I'm actually observing them in their actual work environment. I'm sitting in on meetings and I'm listening to the questions that gets asked and what people lean into, what they sort of take a step back from. So you want to use a variety of techniques, but you also want to make sure there's a qualitative, actually just talk to buyers and find out what they're thinking and why, and ask and be very good listeners.
So other than LinkedIn, what platforms would you recommend to B2B marketers?
I think it depends on who you sell to. So there are different people who like different things. If I'm in a very developer-centric situation, LinkedIn is probably not going to be my channel. I'm probably going to be looking at things like Reddit, right? As a much more effective tool for us. If I am going after HR leaders, LinkedIn is a really obvious place that they hang out in, right? Especially if I'm selling a recruiting solution, for example. So it depends on where your audience is and where you are. For me personally, Facebook and LinkedIn are the places that I do the most business. And, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have told you Facebook. But for me personally, I have a lot of long-standing referral activity that is germinated out of my Facebook relationships that are professional and friendly also. But I found it a very useful tool for me personally. LinkedIn is also very helpful. But again, it depends on where your audience wants to interact with you and is interacting with their peers. And that's where you need to be.
So tell me, who do you look up to in your industry?
Oh, that's such a great question. I look up to a lot of people. I'll give you a couple of names, but there's just so many people I'm fortunate to know. One person I've been spending a lot of time with this last couple of years is Mark Schaefer. Mark Schaefer has written a whole bunch of books you probably know, Cumulative Advantage, most recently, a whole bunch of things. And the reason I so admire Mark and really look up to him is he is constantly adapting. If you look at his work over time, the topics he covered, the area that becomes an expert in is varied and change as marketing has evolved. And I really respect and admire that about him. He's super approachable. He's incredibly smart. I've learned a ton from him, and I just really enjoy spending time and learning with him. I've had fortunate to do some research that was in his latest book with him. And I'm telling you, it was I was a little bit of a fangirl doing that, and it was awesome, but also a really great experience to see how he thinks. So Mark Schaefer is definitely someone I really highly admire. I really admire Ann Hanley, who Chief Content Officer at Marketing Profs, and she is just understands how to write. She's amazing. I think she's really inspirational to a lot of people who struggle with writing, and I admire that a lot about her. Tamsin Webster is great. She is amazing about finding a message and delivering that message, particularly in an oral format. And I've really worked with her. And then there's a bunch of people who I super admire. You might not recognize their name. My business partner, Mary Beth Ross, I spent 5 years trying to coax her into the business because she's incredible, smart, and savvy, and she's amazing, and she makes me a better marketer and a better human being, and I love that. And I look at folks like Erica Goldwater, who is a real PR professional and takes organizations and inspires people to do that. So I could keep going. There's just, dozens and dozens of people that I admire, and I won't do that for your audience. But if people are really curious, go to my LinkedIn. You'll see who I'm connected with. Those are the people that I learn from every day and really respect, and I'm super pleased. I've had an opportunity to cross paths with them.
Wow. Mark Schaefer is a marketing legend. So tell me, what are your favorite business and marketing books?
I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I know this is a podcast, so folks can't see that. There is just a plethora of things that I have learned from. I'll tell you a couple of my favorites that might not be obvious. So I've read, like I said, all of Mark Schaefer's and Ann Hanley books, and they're amazing. There's a couple that I think fewer people are familiar with. There's a book, it's actually kind of an old book, but called Switch. And I find it to be an incredible book that makes you think about how changing an organization. A lot of times there's people who want to make a big change in how the organization functions, a company that's been around 20, 30, 40 years. Switch is an incredible book to do that. Jay Baer's Talk Triggers is amazing. Word of mouth in B2B is the most underutilized tactic. And that book really lays out how to think about it. I'd like to see more people using those techniques and using it. And then I have some really fun things like Tom Fishborn's Marketunist book. When I'm getting out of a bad meeting and I'm feeling like I didn't get through to someone, I pick that up, and it always gives me a giggle, and it gives me an opportunity to remind myself, okay, go back, try it again. And then, of course, selfishly, I'm really proud of the work that I've done with Unleash Possible, and the feedback that I get from my readers and such about the book and how much it's helped to impact their marketing and their trajectories and their organizations.
So what inspired you to write Unleash Possible? What is the story behind it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a couple things have inspired me to write it. So one of the things that inspired me was my sister, who is in a completely different field than I am, but she wrote and was published a book. And it's like, if my sister can do this, I so admired her ability, because it took all of these big ideas she had and got it in one place. And I wanted to do that. So I definitely have to give her credit for sort of setting the bar for me to do that. But also Unleash Possible was written for two major audiences. One was for a lot of people who wanted to hire me for consulting, but couldn't afford to do it, or I wasn't, they just weren't in an organization where they needed to do that. But I wanted a way to help them. So Unleash Possible is a way to help them. It gives them very prescriptive steps that they can take to try and get better at what they're doing. And then also I worked with a lot of people who knew what they wanted to do and were inspired, but they needed to convince someone else. They needed to convince their CEO or someone on the board or someone else to do this. And Unleash Possible is a resource that they can use for that purpose as well. And I have a lot of people come to me and say, I shared this with my CEO or with our chairman of the board. I have a lot of chairmen of the board who come with me and say, hey, can you work with our marketing team? I feel like we've under-resourced them and I want to help support them. And all of those ways that people use the book are super rewarding to me.
So tell me, what is the future of B2B marketing? And what role is AI going to play in developing business strategies?
Yeah, so I'll tackle the first one first. The future of B2B marketing is all about adaptability. So we will always have new channels of communication. We will always have new campaigns. We will always have new competitors. What we need to do is break this old cycle we had is like every year in October, I'm going to build my marketing plan and I'm going to go execute my plan. And the next October, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do the same thing over again. We need to get better at research. We need to integrate it on a more regular and consistent basis in what we're doing. We need to measure impact to the business more effectively. We need to be more agile and adaptable and think about we don't not want to know where we're going to be in a year or 5 years from now, but the path to get there is just going to change. And we have to stop thinking about these very static plans that we go out and execute, which is a big difference than when I started in my career. We could do a whole episode on artificial intelligence. I am deeply intrigued. I study it quite a bit, both on behalf of my clients, a lot of which are doing sort of underlying AI technology and understanding their buyers and how they affect the market, but also as a marketer. I've done some research that looked at when should we use artificial intelligence to drive engagement with buyers and when should we not? And the data is really clear about when that happens. So I believe artificial intelligence is an incredibly important tool, but it's our obligation to not do to it to what we did with automation. If marketers use artificial intelligence like we did automation, we are doomed to fail. And we need to not do that. We need to think about trust. We need to think about when we use these tools. And I'll just give you an example. So there was a hotel that I stayed in quite a lot, and I'll give you sort of the abridged version of the story. But there's a concierge there who is amazing. He's just absolutely welcoming and incredible. And anytime I stayed in that area, I always stayed on the concierge floor solely because he is just an amazing human being. And he provides me a level of service that I really, really, really value. And a little robot concierge that we sometimes see roving around a hotel can't replace him telling me I look beautiful, even though I'm tired and just came off a 12-hour flight, or telling me that helping order just the right food for me and making sure it gets to my room, right? Those are things that he does. However, there are times when I do not want to talk to, in this case, his name is Luigi. I don't want to talk to Luigi. The hair dryer in my room, it's 6:45 in the morning, and I have a 7:15 meeting, and my hair is all wet coming out of the shower, and I realize the hair dryer is broken, which has happened to me more than one time. I don't actually want a human coming to my room to deliver a hair dryer. I'm not dressed. I want the hair dryer. So can a little robot come by, which has some amazing, by the way, technology, which I won't belabor on how it works, but has an incredible set of artificial intelligence technology in it that makes that happen, how it can navigate the hotel and it can call my room when it gets to the door. I can do all these kinds of things. Yeah, that's when I want to use artificial intelligence. And we can talk, there's a million other examples when that comes in, but it's our job as marketers to know when to use each of those tools, when to be very human and when to leverage technology. And it's a big responsibility of ours to get this right.
I agree with you. The role of AI in business and marketing deserves its own episode. Thanks a lot for your time and insights, Samantha. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad we had a chance to connect.
If you found this interesting, you must check out her book, Unleash Possible. You'll find the link in the description. To get more such great insights from the world of business, branding, and marketing, subscribe to What Market Wants. Share this with someone you want to help and join me in this remarkable journey where I help you unlock your market potential. Cheers!